Good morning, everyone. We're just waiting for a few more people to join us, and we'll be starting in a minute or two. So please bear with us. Thank you. My name is Kevin Hasler. I'm a Senior Director at APCO Worldwide, and I'm delighted to have the privilege to be hosting our webinar this morning. But I'll introduce everybody to you briefly, and we'll be starting in a couple of minutes. Okay, well, now it's 11 o'clock, so I think we'll get underway. I know a number of people will still be joining us soon. But so first of all, can I thank everyone for joining us on the webinar today, which, as you know, is focusing on, it's another part of the APCO Leadership Series. And this, our webinar today is entitled The Road to Recovery, Tourism and Travel Post-COVID-19. As I think I just mentioned, my name is Kevin Hasler. I'm a Senior Director at APCO Worldwide. I'm delighted to be hosting the webinar this morning. We've got a distinguished panel to talk about, I think, one of the biggest sectors in the region. And I know tourism is something very close to my heart, having lived and worked in the region for the best part of 2 decades. Just in terms of to advise people how what we're going to do today, I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists shortly. Then we're going to take you through just a little bit of research that we've done about the sector to give people a perspective before we get into asking questions of our 3 panelists. It looks, unfortunately, would be 4 panelists, but unfortunately, Nehal Badri from Brand Dubai has been having some technical problems this morning, may be able to join us later, but at the moment, we think we may have to go without her. One thing, and at the end, we'll have 15 minutes for questions. All of your microphones, if you're joining us, are muted today, but please, you'll find a Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please, can you type in any questions and also let us know whether they're for one individual or for each of the whole panel, and then I will ask those questions at the end. So I think without further ado, it's a delight to introduce and meet the panel. We have Anita Menderata, who's a special advisor to the Secretary General of the United Nations World Travel Organization, and also no stranger to the region, as she's also on the advisory board of the Royal Commission for Al Ula in Saudi Arabia. I'm also delighted to introduce Syed Al Sayed, who's the Destination Marketing Director at the Department of Culture and Tourism in Abu Dhabi. And last, Fraser Robertson, who's the Head of Global Brand Development and Marketing at the Red Sea Development Company. So welcome all, and thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Our pleasure.
As I said, the first thing we wanted to do is just to take you through a little bit of research that we've been doing as a business in terms of the impact in the region and what people are thinking and saying about travel and tourism and any concerns that people may have. We looked at about 150 papers, both from internationally and also from the region, to understand some of the key issues that people are talking about at the moment, both at the global and GCC level. And also we've done some analysis to see what kind of topics are coming out that matter to people most in a post-COVID world. And this is what we tended to find. In terms of the travel motivators and industry developments, 11%, for example, were concerned primarily about booking cancellation, the flexibility of their planned habits. 10%, I think this is something perhaps to be interesting to you, Fraser, are interested in sustainable development. A lot of people obviously are worried about health and safety. Where it comes to the travel destinations, the travel debate, I think people, interestingly, are still interested in going to some of those places they've never had a chance to get to. And again, perhaps that might be something, Fraser, you might allude to later on in terms of where is that bucket list, some of the places that are now opening up in Saudi Arabia that haven't been opened before. So some of our key findings were in terms of the motivators for travel, what is going to encourage people to travel going forward. I think safety and cleanliness clearly seems to be one of the biggest motivators for travel, whereas booking and flexibility and cancellation is a big concern for people, the second most thing. And of course, I think, given that sort of, the current economic climate, the next one was people getting a good deal, which is perhaps unsurprising when you think of what's happening around the world. And then the key factors in choosing a destination for many people were, and I think probably the whole concept of social distancing is coming into play here, where people are looking for private, quiet, uncrowded and rural spaces. And also, I think, as so many of us are working from home and perhaps being separated from loved ones, the ability to be with family. So that was just kind of a quick summary scene setter. But it's also interesting, I think, and many of us will have seen this, that around the world, what different tourism authorities are doing to actually encourage people to come back or to tell people not to forget us. So we just thought, as a thought starter, we'd share something that the Greek Tourism Board has done.
What makes Greek summer so precious? It's not the sea. It's not the sun. It's more than that. Greek summer is a state of mind. Being with the people you love. Connecting with nature. Feeling free. That's Greek summer. So this year, enjoy your Greek summer wherever you are.
And that may resonate with many of us in terms of our plans for this year. We may not be able to get away, but perhaps we've still got that memory of where we want to go in the future. But now I'd like to ask the panel to perhaps quickly introduce themselves, starting with Anita. Anita, perhaps you'd just like to say a little bit about yourself and also any view that you have on the current issues around the pandemic, particularly from a World Tourism Organization perspective. Anita.
Thank you very much. A very good morning, good afternoon, and assalamu alaikum to all watching. And a thank you to APCO. I'm incredibly grateful to be a part of this panel. It's an important discussion at a very important time. And for that reason, I extend very warm greetings from the Secretary General of the United Nations World Tourism Organization, who knows I'm in the Middle East this morning, even though I'm in London. We're incredibly valuing this time to be able to actually pause the world and look at how is tourism going to unfold when the doors, the borders, the skies open. It was exactly as you said, Kevin, this is about the pandemic. This is a global healthcare crisis that has triggered a global economic and as a result, travel and tourism crisis. But it's a healthcare crisis first and foremost. And we're at a really delicate point right now where countries are wanting and needing to open their borders and their industry, but we need to keep it in balance as to what the risk factors are, recognizing we don't understand the life cycle of COVID-19, we don't have a cure, and we don't have a timetable for vaccination. So it's an interesting point in history, but now's the time to pause and really understand how exactly are we going to rebuild the world of tourism, because there's a lot that we can course correct coming into this time to make sure that we do indeed build a stronger tourism sector and world as a result coming out of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. I'd now like to hand over to Syed. Perhaps you could just introduce yourself and your role in tourism in Abu Dhabi. And if you or Abu Dhabi Tourism have any perspectives, top line on the impact of COVID-19 on the Emirate.
Yes. So I'm Saeed Saeed. I'm the Destination Marketing Director for the Department of Culture and Tourism in Abu Dhabi. From our perspective, obviously, it's been a very difficult period for the stakeholders involved in the industry and the ecosystem that we're trying to support. But I think there's a lot of positives to look at from individual perspectives. You know, I've seen a lot of people go through the 5 stages of grief very quickly, starting with anxiety and being, scared about what's coming next. But, acceptance came and people are really looking inwards and starting to do a lot of self-development and enhance their ability to be more resilient, whether we're talking about individually, psychologically, but also from businesses and startups and small enterprises. So we've become more lean over the past 3 months, I would say, as an ecosystem. We're having Zoom conversations with people around the world more often, and it's the new norm. But from a tourism perspective, I think it's given us a chance to look at our strategies and our approach to things, and also gave us the platform to really reach a mass amount of people that have been stuck at home and consuming content, more and more of it. Everyone's on their device and looking at more videos, looking at more 360 virtual tours. So we've been still able to get the message of Abu Dhabi out to more people than usual through these segments. And I think there's a huge appetite for people to leave these 3 or 4 walls that they're surrounded by and go to that next destination. So we're looking forward to the positives that will be coming out in the next 6 months to a year, and we're ready.
Thank you, Syed. And now I'd like to ask Fraser just to say a few words about your organization and any top line views on the pandemic. Fraser, you're on mute at the moment.
Good morning.
There you go.
Thanks for the introduction. We're slightly different. The Red Sea Development Company is in fact a development company. The resort, the destination doesn't exist yet. And for those of you who don't know about us, we're about 544 employees. We have 1,500 people on site. We're down about 40–50% at the minute during COVID. Our business is driving ahead within the limitations, of course, of COVID, with the view of having our first guests at the end of 2022. What I think that COVID has done is create a heightened sensibility. And oddly enough, a lot of our DNA of what our brand, which will be launched at the end of this year, the consumer brand at the end of this year, is about caring both for the environment and people. So I'll comment more about COVID and how that would play into the longer term. We probably don't know what it's going to be. In the short term, it does impact our development, but we're still on track to deliver our project. So thank you for now, and I'll pass it back to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Fraser. Very useful to hear that, very helpful. I'm looking forward to having more of a detailed conversation with you later. But we're going to kick off the actual Q&A session this morning with Anita, who I'd like to now start to talk about. I think the first thing I wanted to really talk about, Anita, was we're all stuck at home at the moment. We can't travel. We can't get on a plane. So I think the question to you to start with is how to keep the love alive. How do you create that kind of emotional connection with people in this difficult time that will pay off later with perhaps with existing and also obviously with new visitors in the future?
I shall do. Thank you. Kevin, it's a really important question, and it's something that has been, in my mind, a part of the solution of getting people through this time. This time has caused the world to be locked down for 150 days in a way that our world, our generation never has before. And it's not just been physically claustrophobic, it's been psychologically. So exactly as Fraser has said, travel has allowed a degree of escapism. And Saeed said it perfectly around content and the power of content. What's really important right now is the fact that we live in a generation that has lived and loved travel. It has defined us in so many ways. It's made connections come closer, even with the technology. And ironically, the more people have been apart during this time, the more they want to be together. The Zooming is great, but you can't hug through a Zoom. And that missing is really important, particularly as many people were locked down at a time when they were not where they would have wanted to have been. So what's happening in terms of keeping the love alive is that the travel industry has become a powerful version of escapism, but also connection, like what Greece has done, what the UNWTO has done with the Travel Tomorrow campaign, and recognizing the traveler is now the hero, not the destination. And it's about recognizing what the traveler is going through in longing to be with people they love, in places that they love, and holding on to that hope and keeping the anticipation going. Critically within that as well is recognizing that it's not just that the value of travelers has changed during this time, the value of travel has changed. So there's a complete recalibration, which means now is not the time for campaigning, it's a time for communicating. And this is the opportunity for destinations like Greece has done, like South Africa has done, like many countries have done. Make that connection in a missing you now, can't wait till you're here, even for a place like Alula, which is not going to really be open for large tourist groups for several years, or like the Red Sea. But keep the anticipation, keep that connection, because we never forget who our friends are and who stand by us during challenging times.
It's interesting you say that, because my next question was going to be the role, you know, the virtual tours, video assets, interactive experiences, those kind of things. How important are they now at this very difficult time to actually engaging with people all around the world?
Profoundly, especially in places, for instance, like in Alula, which has done a huge amount of work in the virtual space, because there are a number of soft touch destinations that people want to see and understand, but we need to manage contact because it could actually do damage to destinations until we understand the protocols, not from a health and safety point of view only, but just from an engagement. In Alula, you're dealing with a site that is UNESCO World Heritage protected. So it's being able to allow people to see and engage with places even though they can't physically be there. So the virtual space has been incredibly important, and it has kept the love alive because people have been able to get right in there. It's also been very powerful from the point of view of demonstrating to people the challenges we had with over-tourism, which was really about overcrowding, was a reflection of two issues: bad management and bad manners. There is nothing that, as a traveler or a tourist, just because I have a passport, a credit card, and a cell phone, does not entitle me to go into someone else's home without knocking on the door and taking my shoes off. So by being able to virtual travel, we're able to see places in a way that they should be seen, so that when we're able to revisit, we can relearn our manners and respect about those places. Because sustainability is not just about green, it's economic, it's cultural, it's environmental, absolutely, and it's also spiritual. And so we need to make sure that the virtual world allows us to, again, recalibrate how we reconnect with the world.
It's interesting you talk about Alula. With destinations like that, and perhaps I'll ask a similar question to Fraser, destinations that are yet inaccessible, destinations that are perhaps very new to people, how do you communicate that to people, that there's something new, exciting, and out of this world in the future that perhaps they want to go to? Yeah, it was interesting, our research showed about 7% have got sort of bucket list items at the top of their agenda and places they really want to get to. But how do you communicate that to people when in some cases you haven't got the infrastructure or it's not open yet, but it's a future aspiration? How do you convince people to perhaps, you know, keep their dollars in their pocket and maybe wait till these places open?
Indeed, it's creating value around the values of the place. And I think what's really important is that traditionally tourism would always talk about the where and the what of the product, rather than looking at what it actually stands for and why it exists. If you look at a place like Alula, which is just a spectacular, spectacular crossroads of history, culture, trade, and travel from thousands of years ago, the opportunity to go back there is profoundly enhanced when we understand its history even before we get there. So the beauty about a place like an Alula, which is not going to officially open in terms of the travel sector at a larger scale, and this is where full credit to the Kingdom and Vision 2030, which has positioned sustainable tourism at the center of the entire strategy for the Kingdom going forward. It's looking at it from the point of view of understand and appreciate the place and the people before actually putting in a footprint. So the storytelling, the why, the how makes it richer, and that can be done during the lead up time to actually being able to discover it, rather than simply going, seeing a place, taking a photograph, and moving on. That way of travel is lost because, as I said earlier, the value of travel and the values of travelers has made people appreciate more the here and the now for when they get there. And what better way than to teach them in advance the richness of that place and those people who are there.
My next question relates more to your role with the World Tourism Organization. Clearly at the moment, even though you see slowly places are reopening, more flights are being offered and what have you, but from a global tourism perspective, what can you do to help restore confidence in people that it's safe to travel, that I'm not being endangered by getting in basically a metal tube with 300 other people for 7 hours. You know, how are you going to overcome perhaps that fear of flying that people may now have?
Indeed. It's a great question because we're being faced with it all the time. And exactly as you said when you opened up, this is about the pandemic. And ultimately, it's about policies that governments will now have between each other to open borders and to allow people in, whether it's using the concept of bubbles, corridors, air bridges, or opening up regions. But it's also very much about the protocols. What I find interesting about this time, Kevin, is that the protocols are coming in for safety, health, and hygiene. But what is it doing to the quality of the experience? I'm a swimmer. I don't want to go to a resort, not be able to swim in a pool or smell bleach when I actually want to be smelling jasmine. So there's going to be some recalibrating required between putting the protocols in place and doing it in a way that still maintains the quality of the experience rather than people feeling, well, why bother? What we also need to keep in mind is that health and safety protocols right now are based on a hypothesis of the pandemic. They're not based on what we know of the life cycle or we know of a cure and a vaccine. So once we do establish what the vaccine cure is, what the vaccine is and what the life cycle is of the virus, we can recalibrate and re-engineer the protocols to respond more accurately. And that will most likely cause some, hopefully, some easing. But even before that happens, countries need to open up. Tourism economies need to open up. And that's where the UNWTO just last week put in place guidelines to restart recovery. Restart is the important part because it needs to be done cautiously and done in a way that doesn't cause issues around too much activity that puts us back by creating a second wave. Also, what I find is vital about this, it's not just about the protocols for the industry, it's the travelers. And it goes back to the issues we had with over-tourism. Travelers need to respect the protocols as well. If you and I are sitting on an aircraft and we've gone through the airport system, we've gone through the protocols, everything's fine, and suddenly I decide to take my mask off, what's the consequence? So travelers need to respect the protocols as much as the industry does and governments do. So we're at a really interesting time of everyone stepping up and taking responsibility in a situation where the problem is invisible. So we have to trust one another to take care of one another.
Thank you, Anita. I think we'll close it now and we'll move on to Saeed, but I'm sure there'll be lots more questions for you from the people listening in later on. Saeed, perhaps if we can take it now from sort of Anita's global perspective, now perhaps to a more regional perspective for yourself and the work that you and your team do in Abu Dhabi. I think the first question I'd like to ask is, how can you stand out now in a very competitive environment among other destinations when everyone wants to be the place that the first tourists come back to? You know, Abu Dhabi is the first place on people's list to come back to when they can travel more easily again. How do you communicate that and how do you overcome that challenge? There's a lot of competition out there.
There definitely is going to be a lot of competition, but I think we've, from the insights we've been gathering and the research we've been doing, we saw that the rise in interest for off the beaten path destinations and steering away from major tourism hubs has been a trend that is still ongoing. Whether it's trying to stay away from the risk of crowds or trying to kind of disconnect from society and be one with nature, we've seen that a lot of people are looking for remote destinations, places where they can be alone in nature or reconnect with themselves as well. So the beauty about Abu Dhabi is we have a lot of different experiences that we can cater to. So if you do want to, be out in the desert and stargaze, we have that opportunity. If you do want to be on an island, on a beach with not a soul in sight, we do have that ability to cater to that as well. So the element of people wanting to disconnect and kind of be in touch with nature, once again, being stuck in a city, not wanting to travel to another major city, I think we're in a good position to cater to that demand. But I think as well from the measures that Anita was talking about, Abu Dhabi has shown, the UAE in general as well has shown that the health and safety of both our residents and our visitors is of utmost priority. The measures taken in place have been tremendous. The government has spent millions on testing facilities and field hospitals just to make sure that we are prepared and ready to cater to not just the individual interests of the traveler, but also for their health and safety needs as well. We've already implemented many measures, and Anita rightfully said that we don't have all the facts in place yet globally, but all best practices that have come out, whether it's from the WHO or other authorities around the world, have been implemented in our malls before we decided to open them up, in our hotels, in our public facilities, in the airports, and the aircrafts that we will be using to get those people back into Abu Dhabi. So I think from a preparedness operational perspective, we are up there with the best of them to welcome people back, knowing that they can rest safe and be confident in the health and safety of them and their families as well.
It's interesting you talk about that, because that kind of links into my next question in terms of how are you communicating that to visitors in terms of, you're putting all these processes in place, the systems, the safeguards, the cleanliness and what have you, so that people have that confidence. But how are you actually telling them that all these things are in place in terms of the cleanliness, the safety thing when you check in at a hotel? Obviously at the moment it's very limited to staycations, but obviously people can, stay at different places if you're a resident in the Emirates. So how are you communicating that to give them that peace of mind when they come to Abu Dhabi?
So we do have a campaign that's live right now, has been live for a month or two, called the Stay Curious campaign that we have. So, people were stuck, they couldn't go anywhere, but we want them to stay curious and feed that curiosity through the content that we have. One of those pillars is definitely the highlighting of all the measures that are being taken in place by Abu Dhabi's entire ecosystem, whether it's the airport or the airline, but as well through the hotels. We have a clean and safe certificate program that we've launched in the past month, where we actually hand out specific certificates for hotels that fit the criteria that we've put in place with the Department of Health. Whether it's cleaning sheets more often, whether it's sanitizing every single room after a guest leaves, where the heat sensors at the entrances, all the things that we feel elevate the health and safety perspective of the hotel or the facility, whether it's a theme park that are due to open up soon. We give these certificates and then we communicate through the hotels as well that this hotel has been certified by DCT Abu Dhabi to be safe and clean and so on.
Maybe that's very much obviously about the short term, but maybe perhaps looking a little bit further ahead to the medium and long term. What plans do you and your colleagues have for the development of tourism in Abu Dhabi? And also, how has the pandemic changed them, if at all, or is it pretty much still that same long-term plan and strategy?
It's the same strategy still exists. It's still in play. The bump in the road that was COVID, again, only allowed us to take some time and rethink things and how to achieve things in the long term. But it's just a bump in the road. We're all going to get through this together, both the destination and the visitor and the stakeholders within. The plans still to contribute more heavily into the GDP exist. The plans to develop and establish a world-class destination still exist. We still have plans to open up museums such as the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi and the Sheikh Zayed Museum. There are still plans in place to open up more hotels in the near future. I think it's just that everything has been pushed back, and not by much, just by a few months. Our colleagues on the call would know that there is a lot of work that had to be stopped, period. You couldn't have construction work going on. You couldn't have specific pillars of development that needed to be in place happen. So I think there was a brief pause, but we're back to our plans originally, and we're currently overlooking a lot of the development that was planned from before the pandemic. And all I can say is watch the space. We have a lot coming.
That's good to know. And probably leads quite nicely into my next question, which is, where do you expect these visitors to come from? And do you think there's some anxiousness about people perhaps traveling long distances? Obviously, from an international perspective, you're looking to attract a lot of people from Europe, that 6-7 hour flight time away. With people a bit nervous about getting on a plane, is that going to be an issue, or what's your strategy there in terms of targeting international markets?
I think the same markets that we have been targeting in the past are still our priority markets. Obviously, it's going to be a stepped approach. The staycation element, the domestic travel, is going to be the one that we focus on initially, and we'll see numbers from. And I anticipate regionally will be, again, a short haul, but also it would be easier for us to have some agreement in place with Saudi airport authorities to make sure that who we're sending and who they're sending is either tested or whatever we both collectively decide to put in place. But no, I don't think that fear will be there for long to get on a flight for the long haul. I think again, we have great partners in Google and TripAdvisor and Sojourn and Adara and all these players in the tech tourism field that show us that people are still looking and wanting to book there. They just are waiting for that book now button to show up to really get on a flight and go somewhere. And I think what we are seeing is go somewhere new. So most probably, veteran travelers, people that have been around the block, or will not be going to a regional hub. So a German that's been to France, Spain, the UK, Czech Republic, you name it, will not want to go to another European destination again in the next year. They might go there just to get out of the house in the next few months, but eventually they will want to get on a flight and they will want to go somewhere as far away from home as possible. Trust me. That's how I feel right now. I want to get out of this place.
That's good to hear, and it's good to end. I think we'll end that on a very positive note. And I think your comment about people wanting to go somewhere new is a nice probably segue into now sort of turning the conversation over to Fraser to talk a little bit about moving from the Arabian Gulf over to the Red Sea. And Fraser, I think the first question we'd have for you is very much about sustainability. Clearly, the project, the Red Sea project, is going to be on some very remote islands in the Red Sea. There's a lot of debate and discussion about sustainability in tourism at the moment and beyond. But what's different about your project? What's different about your proposition for the future of sustainable tourism over there in the Red Sea?
Thank you. The Red Sea, we have 4 core propositions that I'll just lay out because people won't know it. And enhanced sustainability, and I emphasize the enhanced because we're on a program to put back rather than just maintain what's there. We have a target of 30% increase on sustainability. And we're probably the only project in the world that is doing that. And that goes from coral to mangroves to nature, operationally, carbon emissions, all the different areas that will affect the visitor and the operation and the nature. So the link is big. The second part of what we do is all about luxury. And we look at barefoot luxury as a much more, certainly from a Western point of view, much more bearable. We're not about bling, and we're not about lots of glass or high-level buildings. So that fits in, again, with the sustainability, just to touch on that. Nature first, because of our size. We're the size of Massachusetts, which is much bigger than most people would know, although the archipelago is where the attention gets, where the islands are. There's 91, not all being developed, I hasten to say. Ultimately, there'll be 75 still empty or so. The first 2 or 3 are coming on stream. for 2022-23. And the last offering within our pillars is adventure. This appeals to the explorer, people going on the new edge where they've done their bucket list, as you mentioned earlier. Going back to enhanced sustainability, this is all about a culture. And a culture, our brand is developed around these universal cultural things that people want to do. The consciousness that people have now, the sensitivity raised through COVID, both in people's pockets with family connections, and as Anita was saying, in these areas has spilled over, certainly as we can see, into the United States with these riots and so forth, and going on protests and so forth. So there is an awareness of living a better world, being more conscious, and sustainability is part of that. Now, every luxury brand says they're sustainable. Most of them are. But enhanced sustainability, and we're the only project in Saudi Arabia that promotes this, is a different ballgame. And it takes a lot of care, a lot of investment, but that will become the flagship experience. And we feel certainly, while it's not a selling tool, it certainly will appeal to people's consciousness and self-consciousness as we move to opening.
I think my next question is kind of almost related to that move to opening. You're in a very different situation perhaps to Saeed and his team in Abu Dhabi, where they have a lot of existing assets that people can visit now, but are now temporarily closed. You're not going to be open for a couple of years yet. How has it really impacted you? Are you on schedule still? Is it kind of business as usual for you as a developer? Or how has it impacted the actual project phase for you?
Look, I'm not the expert on the project development, but it is business as usual. And we have, as I mentioned earlier, a big workforce, and they're all at work. There is a cutback on the construction site, but it's been under government regulation. We've had very little in Saudi Arabia. There's been very few COVID cases compared to the size of the population. So the government have managed that very well. The cases versus the deaths have been very small in proportion, although each death matters along that way. In our company, we've been focused on following the government rules and working within these parameters, but still driving forward to welcome our first guests at the end of 2022. So yes, there's going to be an impact. We probably see a little bit of lag time in some of the work, but that's not the intention. And we also have to keep a perspective. There's been other pandemics in the world that have affected it. And this one, while it touches all our lives and will continue to do so, has to be put in perspective with other things that have gone on, other deaths, other activities. So that, again, managing this, we have to do it in perspective without it dominating our whole conversation about providing jobs for people, economic development. The clash between the lower oil price, of course, has impacted the whole country here. There's no question. But this flagship project is right on track. It's flying its flag. It's funded. Already this year, we've done over 4 billion in award contracts, and probably by the end of this coming year, we'll conclude 10 billion SAR, Saudi riyals, which you know is about $2 billion.
I think my next question would be sort of more related to how you see the pandemic and the impact of COVID-19 as perhaps impacting the broader situation for Saudi tourism. Because obviously, you know, if you think about the last 12 to 18 months, Saudi tourism was really generating momentum. You had the tourism visas coming in last year. You've had new places opening. It was much easier to come into the kingdom than ever before. And I think people had that curiosity factor of wanting to go somewhere new. But obviously, this has now put everything on hold. Do you think people might be reluctant to come back now that that momentum has stopped?
Not at all. Not at all. In fact, I think it's the opposite. I would say that because this country is undiscovered to the average tourist person, then there's still an inquisitiveness. Number two, it's got a relatively small population compared to its landmass. And the tourist activities, of course, some are around cities, but there's a huge area of beautiful countryside, mountains, which we have in the north of the country, which are snow covered in the winter, which most people wouldn't know, all the way down to the south with on the Red Sea coast and inland as well. there's a Diriyah Gate project, for example, that's developing Qiddiya, these other giga projects. And above all, there's a big, big domestic market here. There's about 30 million people in Saudi Arabia, for people that don't know. Plus, we've relatively easy access from the GCC. So for example, while everybody might think it would be Westerners coming here, Saudi tourism and ourselves, we certainly believe that 50% of our market will be out of the GCC. And that's quite a chunk. So ultimately, these trends, we'll see how they pan out. We don't know. But that's, a lot of it is catering not also for the international long haul people, but also the short haul.
So that's obviously going to be something that perhaps plays more to Saudi's favor than some of the other international destinations, say Thailand, where people travel for 10 hours, if the target market is far more local. It is.
And we've very high standards in Saudi Arabia, for those who haven't been here, we've a phenomenal infrastructure. It has very high standards in hygiene, medical care, telecoms. So all of these things make it not a first world adventure in the sense of the big spaces that we have, the Alulas and all the different areas that you can visit, but rather the comfort, the quality of the hotels, the brand name hotels are here. We have several that will be announced later this year who have already committed, and we'll be releasing that towards the end of the year, along with our consumer brand. And then we'll start to see the traction for people, coming to the market. Same with Saudi tourism. They will open up their doors, and ultimately it will pan out after things begin to settle back. But I think people are going to come and settle back with a conscience. And that does play to enhance sustainability from your previous question. And I also believe that they'll carefully check their spend on what they're doing. I mean, the tourism market has been lucky. It's had a great run. It's a volume market. And I think psycho-personalization is going to become, as Anita was slightly referring to, is going to become really, really important in the whole journey. People are going to start to imagine their journey from their home and picture themselves from a safety point of view, from a financial point of view, from an exploratory point of view. And Saudi Arabia, because it's got, low emissions, we've got dark skies accreditation, for example, coming on board. You can see the Milky Way standing in. These are real treasures. And if you take that back again to what both the other people were saying earlier, this space, this nature has become, in a way, the cathedral or the temples of today, in that people go there to restore, to think, to be without. And we have great offerings in what we have, which I'm not going to bore you with just now, but these, our space, our destination is in prime position, ideally, as you said, to be in this post-COVID world, coincidentally.
Thanks, Fraser. I think we'll leave that there. And what I'd like to do now is that we've had a number of questions come in from people who are listening into the webinar. I'd like to now put some of these questions. I think the first one I'd like to put to all of you, which is quite a general question. And the first question we've had is, will leisure travel go back to pre-COVID-19 days? And how long will it be before consumers can afford holidays away from their home countries like they have in the past? Anita, perhaps you want to take that first.
I will do. I think it's an important question, and I'm one that plays with words. There is no going back. We will never go back, because not only has momentum been dramatically halted, but also, again, the mindset of travel and travelers has changed, exactly as everyone has said already today. I think what's really important is that there's the sentiment of travel, and then there's the engineering, the economic engineering of travel. And this is where the recovery and the rebuilding is going to be vital. We know domestic tourism is going to start first for a couple of reasons. A, protocols. People understand in their countries what is safe, what is required. We know, for instance, coming into the UK now, as of yesterday, anyone flying in has to quarantine for 2 weeks. So suddenly someone coming on a 1 week holiday, they spend another 2 weeks. So domestic tourism is going to be there because of ease and peace of mind. Secondly, Any smart government in the world is going to encourage tourism domestically for the single reason that it's one of the greatest economic engines to get the supply chains going. 80% of tourism is small and medium businesses. It's a perfect way to get the economy mobilized again by keeping people traveling at home. Also, importantly, we know that we have 16,000 aircraft around the world that are grounded right now because of COVID-19. It's going to take time to get those back in the air through travel and trade. Emirates, for instance, was just speaking 2 weeks ago and saying that they're looking at 2023 before they get to the levels of aviation route exposure as they had in 2019. So we can't just turn on tourism. We need to recognize that there's a ripple effect in terms of the engineering of the tourism ecosystem, economically, socially, and environmentally, that will need to be triggered. And that's why what Fraser said was really important right now from the point of view of, it's not just opening up to the world. The invitation needs to go out to the world, absolutely. But targeting is going to be vital, starting domestically, leveraging the opportunity for nationals to play a part in rebuilding their country through tourism, expanding to the region, whether it's GCC in the Middle East, ASEAN if it's in Asia, and then going wider out, allowing almost the coordination of logistics, mobility, and motivation to come together. So there will be time. We're looking at domestic until the end of the year, 2021, easing in international, but all of this is dependent on protocols and, importantly, aviation. We don't have travel and tourism globally unless we have aviation. So the aviation network needs to be remobilized safely and carefully, which IATA and ICAO are working on right now with the UN, WTO, and WHO. So there will be no door to throw open and everyone can grab their passports again.
And perhaps you just pass the same question to you, Saeed. What's your view in terms of the post-COVID-19 recovery? When are people going to be confident again to travel? You seemed pretty upbeat earlier and optimistic, certainly from an Abu Dhabi perspective.
I was just going to say I'm a little bit more optimistic than Anita. Not that what you painted is bleak, it's quite realistic depending on the new norm that we're going to live in. But for me, I think 2020 has been, has really slowed things down, not just from the tourism perspective, but as rightfully said, the economic perspective. So this is, I think, the key obstacle is people having money to spend and feeling that they're in a position to confidently spend again. But I'm saying 2022, we can surpass our 2019 figures. Again, so many variables, and it's very easy to just throw a number out there. But the way I see it is we are in a good place, and so is Saudi as well, in a good place to really attract the traveler that has been and seen a lot of the major city hubs and wants to get away from these places. The airlines that we have in the UAE are definitely a key driver to that. Yes, the aircraft are grounded, but that's because there is currently no demand. And as soon as that demand starts picking up, I think it'll be a trickle effect, of course. But both Etihad and Emirates have already announced some of their routes opening up in June. And obviously ramping up as we go, giving it a year and a half, like I said, from my perspective, for 2022 to come, I think is a realistic. It's not that optimistic. It's a bit realistic to say. And the demand is just immense right now. Everyone does want to travel, but again, can they afford to? Do they really need to look at their finances? I'm hoping that there's been a shift of industry. The app that we're using right now has spurned some billionaires, through the changes in people's behaviors. I'm anticipating the same to happen to other niche industries as well. So yes, we might lose some of the classic traveler, but we're gaining new travelers as well.
That I think possibly leads into you, Fraser, very quickly. It's one of the challenges you might have down the line is that people are going to be looking at the money they have to spend a lot more carefully in the current economic climate. And obviously Red Sea is going to be very much a premium, once in a lifetime type destination. Is that going to be a challenge for you? Are you concerned about that?
No, in short. 2 years out before we open, okay, we have 8,000 hotel rooms ultimately. And that's by design, because also obviously it will create demand because you can't get there. It's difficult to get there. If you do get there, you're committed. But part of our enhanced sustainability is controlling the number of travelers. It's not a volume market. You know, we're not sending, this is not Disneyland here. So we're not looking to pump people through here. We're looking for people who are thinkers, who are adventurers, who have exploring mentality. And with that comes another culture, comes other ideas of contributing. Education through sustainability, for example. We have courses planned for how to help see how coral is regrown. So the experience of being in our resort isn't based on the volume, but rather the quality of the thinking, of the vision, the quality of the development company, the quality of the brand experience, and ultimately, probably the quality of the customer that will also come, because only like-minded people will want to engage. And this is incredibly important when you come to marketing, because we don't have billions of dollars to spend. What we have to do is tailor it and get into the heads of people who are like-minded. In the United Kingdom a couple of days ago, although it's a diversion here from your question, there were 200 companies approached the government, including under the arm of Greenpeace, saying, if after COVID you're not going to be more sustainable and be better and more thoughtful, we don't want to work with you. We want to see, so there's going to be a sea change in the way people think about how they spend their money. And they may save up all year to come and do it and see bird watching that they've never seen before. And it will be maybe a once in a lifetime experience, but it will be memorable. And that's what we're selling. Everybody on this panel is selling memories. We're selling ultimately the stories that they take back. And in Saudi Arabia, we feel blessed in a way because there hasn't been many tourists. And this country is incredibly hospitable. It's an unknown fact. Anita probably knows this, having been, so I will know. But to the outside person, it's a discovery. It's a cultural discovery, not in terms of big buildings or museums, but of the people. And it's that humanity that underpins our destination, our company, and ultimately our experience for visitors. That's the direction. And I think when COVID passes, people will be more sensitive, they'll be more aware. However, our philosophy in this cultural brand strategy is about that humanizing the experience and making people feel good about why they're here. And so I'm sure that's the same in Abu Dhabi and other places, but we feel particularly lucky with the Red Sea Development Company and that thinking.
It's interesting you talked about the Greenpeace issue in the UK and sustainability. Another question that's come in specifically for you, Fraser, is asking how you can uphold that sustainable practice in the hotel service at the same time while having to maintain high levels of cleanliness that sometimes use all kinds of products that are not good for the environment and still provide that luxury experience.
Well, of course you can. I mean, there's plenty of products that are eco-friendly and so on and so forth. I mean, we're going to have a renewable energy, solar power, waste management. This has gone from the core. So it's not a case of coming along. The majority, if you look at a hotel, the majority of hotels have been for a long time telling you to put your towel on the floor if you want it washed. This is fine. This is a gesture. We're from the core in our DNA building this enhancement from the site, the construction, the operations. So we're not like coming along and sticking a sustainable sticker on top of a site. We're building it from within the DNA. Electric boats, for example, okay, or maybe a simple one. The noise comes down, the lighting, to be able to see the stars. All of these things are being thought out. It's an incredible vision. It's very ambitious. And the quality of the leadership in this company and above that at the government level here is, should be commended because there's nothing like it. That will then attract the right people. It will be a brand attractor. If people don't want to come, they won't pay.
Another question that's come in from our audience, which I think is one for all of you, I think, is they're asking sort of how's travel going to look in the future as countries reopen? And in particular, are there segments of tourism that may suffer and are there some that will prosper in this kind of new post-COVID-19 COVID-19 environment? And also, how would tourism boards help to promote those, perhaps that new reality post-COVID-19, perhaps with a change of emphasis in certain areas? Saeed, perhaps, maybe start with you on this one.
Yeah, so I think just like we as individuals will have to adapt to a new normal, whether it's wearing masks and gloves and social distancing, the traveler, the future traveler, will have to look at the new norm for traveling as well. You know, whether it's going to the airport earlier, whether there's going to be on-site tests, COVID tests happening, whether it's airplanes are going to be social distanced within the seating. You know, all these new norms are going to have to take effect, and people are going to have to get used to them. For your second question, I think, yes, there will be, I wouldn't say a dramatic shift in segments, but I think new segments will be popping up as well. You know, wellness is one of the things that we in Abu Dhabi are looking at, have been looking at heavily. I think now it's even more of a need for a lot of people to have wellness retreats and have you know, places that they can go and unwind. You know, we work from home, but it seems that our working hours have dramatically increased. So yes, we're not in the office and we're in our safe zone, in our comfort zone at home, but I think disconnecting from everything is a need that everyone is feeling right now. So nature travel, I feel, will be a huge, we'll see a huge surge and an uptick. And I think the classic shopping traveler, I feel, I don't know, but I feel we'll see a slight dip, at least in the short run, because it's, again, not wanting to be in a mall around people and in crowded places for that.
Anita, what's the WTO perspective on this?
It's an interesting one, and I just want to build on what Saeed's saying, because he said something really important there about the fact that, firstly, the way I see it, we divide it into two. There's the change that's going to happen in terms of demographics, because we know that even in, and I don't like using the words new normal, it's more the next normal, but in terms of when the world opens up, and then there'll be the next normal once we understand the virus and protocols change, etc. But in the immediate next normal, we know there's going to be an impact on business travel. Because people can't spend the money, and also we've gotten used to doing this virtually. So it's taken away a high degree of the need to meet either one-to-one or many-to-one. We know there's going to be an impact in terms of specific niches. That's one channel. The channel of wellness is going to be impacted because it's high touch. What does that mean now in social distancing environments? What does gastronomy mean in social distancing environments? So we know there's going to be consideration in niches: cruise, wellness, gastronomy, and exactly as Saeed's saying, the more nature-based wellness will be stronger, but the wellness that was about care, physical, personal care, is going to be impacted. But it's not just the niches that are going to change, it's also going to be the demographics, because we're still dealing with a virus that has a propensity to attack those that are more vulnerable. So while we used to have a very strong silver tourist category of the more elderly travelers, are they going to want to travel as much to different places? Are they going to want to go with families on cruises? So there's going to be a real, and it goes all the way back to what you were saying about rebuilding confidence. Confidence in where they are going and how they're going to experience it. So there's going to be a recalibration in that way as well. And what Saeed said is so important. At the same time, there will be new categories coming out of this. This time has unlocked enormous innovation, and that needs to be leveraged going forward. So wellness is now about well-being. How does that affect everything? Is whether it's a hotel, an attraction, or an airline, it's no longer about the hardware. The software is as important, because safety comes through not just product, but through how one actually takes care of one another. So this demands a relook, and the figures, the trends that we had going into COVID-19 are going to be shifting quite dramatically coming out of it and into the new world, which, exactly as has been said, is there for the reshaping.
We've just got a couple of minutes left, so I'd just like to maybe just have one very quick final question to all of you, and please, if you keep the answer quite short, it's how are we going to convince people it's safe to fly again? Fraser.
I've no idea. I think what we have to do is people and governments have to understand that they can mitigate risk. There are many other challenges out there. One of them might be crossing the street in Riyadh, for example, where there's a high number of motor car accidents and deaths, okay? There are other issues that we have in the medical world in terms of diseases, in poverty, and above all in the economy. And I think we've got to shift our conversation as to say, how are we going to get back to work? We can live with this. You know, this is not the Spanish flu where multi millions of people were killed. There's 7.5 billion people in the world. You look at the statistics. I think we've got to get a perspective, keep it, follow the rules, take the government guidelines. But I do feel that I don't know how you're going to get people back on planes. They're going to come, but I think the governments have now got to loosen it up, get people back at work. When people start earning money, start having a place in their community, be it domestically at home, with their friends, or at work, that's going to have a huge psychological lift.
Hey, Syed, in 15 seconds, how do we get people back on planes?
So Abu Dhabi has been the safest city in the world for 3 years straight in Numbeo, and we don't plan to lose that position anytime soon. I think it's just getting the message out that we are safe, we have all the precautions in place, and we have the healthcare to take care of you if something does happen.
Anita.
Easy. My Secretary General says it very clearly. Trust is the new currency. People, we've gone through this through SARS. We went through it through 9/11. We got people back on the planes. People need to see the changes that are being made to keep them safe, and they need to feel the care that's being given by people on the airlines. BA's put out a beautiful 2-minute piece about now the travel journey on BA. And they're the first airline I've heard talk about safety as care. It's exceptionally done. That's what I need to know. I don't want to smell bleach to know I'm safe. I want to know you're watching out for me. That's, I think, the way forward.
Thank you. And I think that phrase, trust is the new currency, is a lovely way to wrap up the webinar this morning. Can I first of all thank, on behalf of APCO Worldwide, thank everyone who's been listening in this morning. And of course, a big thanks to our 3 panelists, to Fraser, to Syed, and to Anita for joining us this morning. So thank you all for listening, and I hope it's been useful. We've had a lot of people on the call. Apologies for not getting to everyone's questions. We just ran out of time, but the debate will continue. So thank you to everyone. Thank you and have a great day.